Joining me today from Portage la Prairie, Manitoba, I have the incredible author Terrie Todd joining me. Thank you so much for taking the time today, Terrie.
Hi, Sylvia. Thanks so much for having me again.
Absolutely. So, before we get into your brand new book that you have published and you are doing a book launch, this is your 10th book. So, huge congratulations.
Thank you so much. I can't believe it myself. 10 books. It'll be 10 years in January that I launched my first book, and I kind of thought that would be the only one. And now, 10 years later, I'm doing number 10. So I'm almost celebrating that just as much as I am the new book itself.
Of course, that's a huge feat and it is very amazing. So, tell us about this 10th book called Even If I Perish.
Yes, so this is the second in a series called the Even If series, and each of those two books stands alone. But Even If We Cry came out last year. And if you read that book, you may remember it talks about the family of children that came over from Britain to Canada during World War II as an evacuation measure and follows these three kids. And there's a scene in that book where the family in Canada is sitting around listening to the radio, and the story comes on the news about a ship that sank, torpedo, and it turns out that Nina, the main character, she finds out later that one of her friends was on that ship. There was actually 90 children aboard that ship headed for Canada. When I came across that story in my research, I included just that little snippet about it in the first book, but I knew that was a whole other story that needed to be told. And so this novel, Even If I Perish, is really based very closely on a true story. And it's the first one that I've written like that where the main character is actually a historical figure. So it was a little difficult and nerve-wracking to take that on, but I had to give it a lot of thought. How do I tell this? Do I make up fictional characters? That just didn't seem right because it's different than excuse me, placing your fictional characters in a large crowd that historically was real. That you can easily do, but when you've got what happened was in the book, the main character's name is Mary Cornish, and she volunteered to escort some children across the ocean to Canada as part of her contribution to the war effort. And of course, the boat gets torpedoed, and she ends up in the kerfuffle to, save as many lives as they can. She ends up in a lifeboat crammed with twice as many people as it's supposed to hold. She's the only female, and there are six boys there that she ends up trying to look after. They end up separated from all of the other boats. It was just an incredible ordeal. And so I chose to tell this story from her perspective. And like my like the first book, I used kind of a unique structure where the whole narrative is told from her point of view, but each chapter begins and ends with a letter or a document of some kind from so you get some different points of view in there as well.
That is absolutely incredible. And I would love to know what was the genesis of deciding, yes, I want to write stories that are powerful and not just documentary, but like written fiction wise, but there's truth based in this.
Excuse me. Yes. Well, I mean, I'm a fiction writer. I love to read fiction, like a lot of people, and there's just uh, a lot of power in holding people's attention as opposed to, and there are a lot of nonfiction books out there about this event. I read everything I could get my hands on. The only fictionalized account was for children, which was really helpful as well, actually. But um, somehow, I know for myself, I didn't get interested in history until I started reading historical fiction. And so by taking Mary's story, and I kept it as true to everything factual that I could, but the parts that you have to make up are like her inner thoughts, inner dialogue, the conversations between people. And then there's this whole thing where she, in order to keep these boys alive, I mean, one of the things she did, she was constantly rubbing their arms and legs to keep the blood circulating and stuff. But to keep them engaged, mentally, she told them stories, and she picked. They loved this character called Bulldog Drummond. Was a fictional character. There had been, I think, 10 novels written about him back in the 20s and 30s. He was a World War I veteran, British veteran, who, when he got back to civilian life, he was bored with it, and so he goes looking for adventures and solving crimes and all that. And she knew that the boys loved this character, so she started making up stories about Bulldog Drummond. Well, I knew from all the books that I had read that she did this, but nowhere could I find any of the actual stories that she told. So I had to make those up, and which kind of took me into a whole world of writing for children. But what she did was she had her Bulldog Drummond have 6 apprentices, and she gave them the names of the 6 boys in the boat, so that they are then, really personally engaged in the story. And she would leave each chapter on a kind of a cliffhanger, and so that they would be begging for more, and kind of give them a reason to live to the next day. And when you think about, she did that without adequate food, without water, because the supplies in the boat were dwindling every day. And just to have the mental faculties to be able to do that, it's just incredible. So to me, she's become a real hero.
Absolutely. Is there a faith aspect at all to this?
Well, because I'm a Christian and everything I write has a faith element to it, I've taken some liberties. I know that, being British, she was an Anglican. I don't know how faithfully she went to church, but I don't know that she didn't either. And so I've certainly added that in. I've added some prayers that she may have prayed. And there's certainly a huge element of forgiveness at the end of the book. She writes a letter to the commander of the Nazi ship that sank theirs. And I, that part is fiction. There's a whole author's notes section trying to sort out what was fiction and what was real. And that part I made up, where she writes a letter of forgiveness, and she doesn't know if he's ever going to see it. She knows his name, and she sends it to Germany, but she does it for her own freedom. And that's a sticky thing, because she's not only forgiving. And we can't forgive on behalf of what others have suffered, right? But as far as it is within us and how it affected us, that is ours to forgive.
Yeah, that's beautiful. When it comes to your book launch, 10th book, I saw you have some colors on your fingers. Can you tell me a little more about that?
So on Saturday, I went to the nail shop and I picked 10 colors to match my 10 books. And they were gracious enough to do it for me. So they don't particularly go together, but they do represent each of the books. So I'm just having some fun with that. I thought it would be a bit of a conversation starter for the next
Totally.
couple of weeks.
That's great. Tell us about your book launch details.
It's here in Portage la Prairie at the library. And it's Saturday, November the 15th, starting at 10:30 in the morning. We're wrapping up at noon. So I had gone to a come and go format, I guess, during COVID, and just kind of stuck with that for the last few years. But for this 10th celebration, I want to have everybody there at once. And so we're just doing it shorter. We've got tons of door prizes. We're going to have cake and balloons and lots of fun together, I hope. So if people can make it to the library, November 15th, 10:30 to noon. And of course, you'll be able to buy the new book as well as my previous books.
Fantastic. I love from your poster that you shared, you're giving some proceeds back from the sale of the book to the Portage Regional Library. Got to ask, why?
I always try and pick a local charity with these launch parties. And when I was thinking about what I would do this year, because I usually try to tie them in with the book, and living on the prairies, it was hard to think of a tie-in. And then I thought, well, why not the library? They've done these wonderful book launches for me for 10 years now. And so, yeah, that was, once I thought of it, it was an easy yes.
Fantastic. Well, Terry, I really appreciate you sharing your heart today about this brand new book, Even If I Perish. And I hope that the book launch goes really well. Is there anything else you wanted to share today?
I would encourage people to keep that phrase, even if, in their minds, because we hear it a lot in Christian circles and Christian songs and just daily life. And working on a story like this, where it's so tragic and people have to live under such difficult circumstances, really kind of as you're immersed in it, I found then I go back to my daily life and all the little frustrations that we face day to day are put in perspective, for one thing. But also, when you think about it, few of us are going to get an actual opportunity to say, okay, I might perish if I do this thing, but I'm going to do it anyway. We're not likely to have an opportunity to, save the lives of a bunch of kids. We might. It might happen once in our lives. But for most of us, it's that day to day, the frustrations of living in a fallen world. Now, this week, I'm launching a book. We've been the victims of computer fraud. And so we've had all, just spending hours and hours troubleshooting this stuff. My dishwasher broke. I'm still fighting a cold, all these things, none of which are life threatening. But those are the kinds of things that we face day to day that can drag us down and so easily, right? And so if we could just keep that phrase in mind, even if, because nothing can separate us. And in fact, this morning I was reading that familiar passage about, neither death nor life and all that can separate us from God's love.
Romans 8.
And I
Yeah.
paraphrase, I paraphrased it for myself a little bit. I said, neither computer frauds nor hacked email accounts, nor broken dishwashers, nor nagging coughs, nor phlegm, nor fatigue, nor any other frustration will be able to steal the joy that is mine through Christ Jesus. I thought, just because it's in those struggles that we grow. And if everything was always great all the time, there'd be no growth and no opportunity to learn to really see how, God does come through for us. So anyway, that's probably way more than you wanted me to say, but if I could just
It's
encourage people
beautiful.
with that.
It's a good reminder for us all. So thank you, Terry, for that. And yeah, I hope everything goes really well. Congrats on your 10th book.